My name is Father Andrew Cuneo, and we are in Carlsbad, California, in our church, St. Katherine Church. It's an Orthodox church that we started here in 2011, and it's growing. If you're coming from a Protestant background, you've never really looked at the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, it's an amazing thing to kind of peel the curtain back before the 1500s and just realize, wow, there's so much has gone on for all these centuries. And to realize you can't fit it into a teacup, right? It doesn't go into a very simple series of sound bites. It takes time. It's good to be patient and to meet people in those respective traditions who are careful for you and want to help you and not just convince you out of their ego. And that takes time. You know, it's easy to be swayed by the latest podcast or the latest book, but any real conversion, any real commitment has to be, a matter of love, and love that's based on knowledge, and that just takes time, like any form of love. So there's many beautiful things. Sometimes it's hard for us as Western educated Christians to get out of our heads and not simply look at things from an apologetic standpoint, but to realize that there are ways that we encounter truth that are not just predicated on who has the best arguments, and that can be hard for us. I mean, so much of the Christian church is encountering holiness, and we encounter those forms of holiness not merely in those who have the best arguments or who are the most educated, but those who are the most pure. And one of the beautiful things about the Orthodox Church is that we have so many instances of holy saints who are uneducated, right? And may not have been great YouTube apologists, but God, shone through them and worked through them, and beginning to get a sense of that aroma of holiness is a difficult thing. It's not just a head matter. So one can go charging in on issues of apologetics and doctrine and dogma. It's great. We do the best we can according to our abilities and our resources. But on the other hand, God speaks to us in a lot of different ways, and not all those are cerebral. I was stunned as a university grad student who had spent all my life trying to work on things rational, on things intellectual, but I was really stunned to encounter in the Orthodox tradition that understanding of the human person that recognizes that we have our feelings and our desires and our appetites, we have our thinking faculties, our logical and discursive faculties, but to realize that in the Orthodox Church, we understand and hold to that the highest part of the soul is a noetic faculty, and that the nous, or the intellectus in Latin, as opposed to the ratio, is a way that God gives us as human beings to meet, encounter, and experience truth directly and unmediated, and we see that in the saints so often. And that our primary encounter with God is not necessarily either rational or even emotional. And so often in Western Christianity, we find those polarities, a kind of dialectic between versions of Christianity that are highly emotionalized and kind of emotional roller coasters, whether they're in forms of worship or one's quote-unquote relationship with God, or highly intellectualized versions of Christianity that are very dry, very logical, and even in some sense watertight, logically speaking, but are missing something in the human person. And so I was floored as an academic to realize, maybe you've been barking up the wrong tree for a lot of time, and that it's not a matter of degrees, it's not a matter of seminaries, it's not a matter of better Bible studies, but it's a matter of holiness and love, and that God can meet us in ways that are beyond the strictly logical and the strictly emotional.
what would you recommend to somebody that's coming from a Western background and they have that programming so instilled in them to look at everything from perspective of head knowledge and acquiring information? What are some of the things that they can do to kind of break that mold?
Yeah. I think for us, the saints are always the most helpful doorway to read about the lives and the experiences of a Saint Paisius or a Saint Porphyrios or a Saint Iakovos, and to realize that, the gospel is repeated in these saints in every single century and continues to be repeated in the history of the church from the get-go. And that is just the most marvelous way to encounter that. There's so many stories, and it's one of those great realities of Christianity. Like, it's alive, and when you meet people who are alive with that experience of the faith, it gives one that encouragement to realize, wow, the gospel is a living, organic expression in the church. It's not simply a list of rules, not simply a list of dogmas. So to read the biography of Saint Paisios, or to read the lives and teachings of Saint Porphyrios, that is such a wonderful way to kind of get out of the pugilistic theological arguments that can predominate sometimes.
What would you say, since we covered a little bit about the Protestant background, what would you say to somebody that's within the Catholic background and they're exploring Orthodoxy, but they look at the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church and they say, well, a lot of the things that are attractive to me about Orthodoxy actually exists within the Catholic sphere. I could just become a Byzantine Catholic, a Melkite, Greek Catholic, that kind of thing. Maybe talk a little bit about how, why it's important that, that there is a distinction between being Orthodox and being, let's say an Eastern Catholic.
Yeah. They used to say of the Anglican Church that it's a bridge church, right, between certain Protestant churches and the Catholic Church. And in some ways, the Eastern Rite churches can also be seen that way, as a bridge church between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches. But as people often say, bridges are not good places to live. You don't want to live on a bridge. I really feel for people who are traditionally Protestant or traditionally Catholic, right, who really believe that Jesus Christ is God, that who really believe in the Holy Trinity, who really believe in miracles, who really believe in traditional Christian morality, who seek the experience of God in their respective traditions. But we're seeing an almost unprecedented amount of change in the Protestant expressions, and we're seeing, even as we do this interview, we're seeing an unprecedented amount of change in the Catholic world. And so, I feel for my traditional Catholic brethren that they're watching something go on in their own communities that's got to be very, very difficult. And it's not just coming up from the bottom. This is coming from the top down, and that poses some serious challenges for an understanding of the magisterium and of papal infallibility. When we have certain proclamations that have come out of late that are, just foreign to the experience of Christianity. One of the strengths and one of the weaknesses of Catholicism is that it has a little bit of everything. And so you can find pockets within the Catholic Church that might have, a much more Orthodox expression, whether it's in iconography or in liturgy or in spirituality. And you'll find plenty of pockets that do not. But what I loved about the Orthodox Church is that what was normative was central. Iconography was not just an option, it was kind of the center mode of art. And that chant was not just an option, like a Gregorian chant parish, so to speak, but that the traditional music was the norm for the church. That an Orthodox pattern of spirituality was not just one of many different charisms within the Catholic Church, but that Orthodox spirituality just kind of says, this is our patristic spirituality, this is what we do. It's purification, it's illumination, it's theosis. and here's our program ascetically about how to work that through in a parish or a monastic context. That's really important. You can't change the liturgy without changing the theology, and you can't change the asceticism without greatly imperiling the experience of Christianity that is offered to us through these ascetical practices. So a lot of the things that used to be regular in the Catholic world are no longer regular. My dad grew up in the 1950s as a New York Catholic, and it was a mortal sin to eat anything besides fish on Fridays, right? A lot has changed since then, whether one's thinking liturgically or whether one is thinking musically, or in terms of artistic expression, or in terms of sacramental practice. The things that have always been done in the Orthodox Church are still being done. You could always have married priests. We still do. You would always serve the holy gifts, with both bread and with wine. We still do. We would always face east, or when we pray, this is how we pray. So things that you can find are still just kind of the norm, and so you don't have to change it or reclaim it or kind of hope it comes back with a better pope.
So you touched on a little bit about how a lot has changed within the Catholic Church. Historically, the Orthodox, how did they view the way the church functioned? Was the Pope at the head of that structure, or what was the consensus of the church at that time?
Yeah, I'm certainly no expert on historical ecclesiology. That being said, I think there's always been a sense in the writings of the earliest fathers, from St. Ignatius onwards, that there is a hierarchy. We do have bishops, we do have priests, we do have deacons, and like St. Ignatius writes in his epistles, we're meant to honor them, we're meant to obey them. They're meant to be people who function in the salvation of the entire church. There are orders, right? There are ranks, as it were, historically speaking, in the great sees of the early church. I tend to think of it more like a family rather than an institution, and to think of it more like brothers than a corporation. And so to really look at the bishops as, you have senior bishops and you have senior brothers. Just like if you have a family of brothers, you have brothers who are older and more experienced and have a lot of say within the family, and you might have an eldest brother, like who's your most senior of the family, kind of the leader in that way. And in many ways, the senior patriarchates, including the Roman Patriarchate, would have been seen as those older brothers. But to have a kind of universal jurisdiction over every brother within the family, where every brother has to do what that eldest brother says, that's just not family. And there are some issues with that, certainly from a theological point of view. I was really interested in, there was a fascinating document in 2016, the Chieti document, where, after years and years of endless theological discussions and historical examinations, the Catholic interlocutors and the Orthodox interlocutors basically said the East has never understood the Roman primacy in the way that the West has, and that any form of reunion should take that into account, right? A reunion doesn't mean going back to how the church in the West has evolved, with an expression of a monarchical medieval papacy with universal jurisdiction. And that has just never been the experience of the East. And so this was agreed upon by the Catholic theologians, which is quite a stunning thing. Whether the Roman Church would embrace that document today, I don't know. But we see there are some real difficulties with rapprochement with the kind of public social stance the Catholic Church has taken, that the Orthodox would just find very difficult to embrace.
I want to touch on a little bit for people that are entering into the Orthodox Church. There are a lot of people that are, watching the content that are now wanting to become catechumens. What does that process look like for people that have made the decision and say, you know what, I do want to become Orthodox and I am coming from XYZ background? What does that process look like? A big question is, do I have to get baptized again, or what's going on there?
Becoming a catechumen is a big step, right? It's a really big step, and kind of like we were talking about before the cameras were on. It's like that step of getting engaged. You can visit a church, you can visit a couple times. It's kind of like dating somebody. You get to know them. But when you get to the point where, like, okay, I cannot see myself in any other version of Christianity. Like, I'm ready to give my whole life and being to this church. Then you're ready to become a catechumen, right? And that's a big step. And so once you're engaged, you close off other relationships and you give everything to establishing and preparing for the step of holy baptism. It's a wonderful thing. So often, I think, in my experience as a priest, what you want to do is the person who's becoming a catechumen has to be at a point where they can just say, I'm picking the fruit off this tree and it comes off without strain, right? The only good fruits that come off a tree are the ones that are ripe. And sometimes a catechumen or a person who wants to become a catechumen is like tugging, am I ready to become a catechumen? I want to become Orthodox, but it's not falling off into their hands. And it should. That when the decision is ripe, it'll make sense. It will also be something that gives ease and peace to the heart. It will flow. And those are times when you're like, oh, this is the right season. Now, fruit can become overripe, and you can be in catechumen for 10 years, and that may not be the smartest idea either. But there's a way in which the decision should not be one of strain. It shouldn't be one of tension. It shouldn't be one that necessarily is causing lots of tension, either in one's own family or one's own marriage, right? Those things have to be worked through so that there's at least a good understanding about where things are going, as opposed to a wrecking ball to the family, to the marriage, to one's relationships. But to try to be at peace and to have that be a natural step for that person. Holy baptism is a great gift, and our bishops are really the ones who kind of help us discern when baptism is needed, when chrismation is needed. I think we're finding today that it's harder and harder to know what kind of baptism anyone had, whether one's Catholic or Lutheran or non-denominational. And to err on the side of do the baptism because we're just not sure what's going on in the churches. And sometimes when the family's broken, or the parents don't remember what happened, or there's no documentation and so forth, it's good really to cover all the bases as best as you can. I remember it's not merely a formal question of okay, they did it in the name of the Holy Trinity, therefore it counts. This is a weird way of thinking. It's a kind of formulaic, magical way of thinking. But it's a matter of grace. And we want the grace of the baptism, right? We want the grace of the chrismation. And so these things are to be, earnestly desired and earnestly sought. I remember a story of a holy elder on Mount Athos. He had come across a family of pilgrims on Mount Athos, and it was the dad and the son and some other pilgrims. And the holy elder said, "You need to get baptized," to the son. And the dad was like, "What are you talking about? We baptized him." And the elder said, "No, you need to get baptized." And again, there was a kind of pushback. No, we baptize all our children. We had one. Well, he went back and they looked in the family records and asked all the relatives, and it turns out they had missed the ceremony for that child's baptism. It hadn't happened. And this was in an Orthodox context. In other words, there's a matter of the soul, there's a matter of grace that's given in holy baptism that is evident, right, to eyes that have that spiritual capacity to see that, right? And so we want the fullness of that. We want that gift of holy baptism, that gift of the Holy Spirit. And, if at all possible, and if it's blessed by the bishop, really, really to do everything you can to be baptized.